Arsenal charged by the FA for failing to control their players at Wolves, even though the decision they were protesting has been found to have been incorrect. The latest on Kieran Tierney, and we'll try and make sense of the Watkins approach on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. But first, a quick message from our partners. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope you're all good. Hope you're all having a wonderful week so far. Not that long until the Arsenal return to action. We keep talking about it. Games every 3 days. And we've got a big one coming up against Manchester City. And we'll make sure we bring you a full and comprehensive preview of that one, all in good time. So really, really looking forward to sitting down and breaking down my thoughts on that game, how I think it will go, where I think the game will be won and lost. But that's not what we're here to talk about on this episode. We are going to talk about the FA charging Arsenal. We are going to try and make sense of this Ollie Watkins thing, because I, for one, am confused, and I'd really be interested to get some of you guys' takes on the situation. So I'm looking forward to doing a bit of that. Plus, we're going to talk Kieran Tierney and spend some time taking some of you guys' questions, of course, from the live chat as well. But yeah, I mean, it's not the biggest surprise in the world, is it, that the FA have decided to charge the Arsenal? Shall we get into exactly what they've said and exactly what the charge is for? Yeah, as I say, no surprise. Saw it coming a mile off. When you read their sort of breakdown of why the decision to send off Miles Lewis-Skelly was wrong, and when you look at the way they sort of, I don't want to say went after the referee, but made it very, very clear that in their opinion, he'd made a very clear and obvious error. You kind of knew that something was going to come back the other way in order to try and restore equilibrium to things, I suppose. This is what the FA posted earlier. Arsenal FC has been charged after its players surrounded a match official during their Premier League fixture against Wolverhampton Wanderers on Saturday, the 25th of January. The club allegedly failed to ensure that its players did not behave in an improper manner around the 43rd minute. Arsenal have until Monday, the 3rd of February, to provide a response. What's my opinion on this? Just pay the damn fine and move on. I'll tell you why, because you can't win. You can't win. You know, if they are going to come out and essentially throw Michael Oliver under the bus. I mean, you can say throw him under the bus. Actually, what they've done is just rectified what was clearly a wrong decision. But you always knew that there was going to be something coming the other way in order to, as I say, try and ensure that Arsenal are painted in a bad light and in a bad picture. And I just, look, it's just really, really frustrating. Like, first of all, just think of the logic around this, or the lack of. You have charged a group of players for reacting passionately to a decision that you, the same panel, have found to have been incorrect. Does that not in itself tell you that their protests were justified? And listen, I think there's a line here. I don't think you can allow players to get overly aggressive, and I don't think you can allow players to essentially push the boundaries. But the point is, I don't think anybody in Arsenal red and white did that. There wasn't someone barking in the referee's face in a really super aggressive manner in the way like we've seen, for instance, Erling Haaland act not so long ago. There was none of that. It was a spirited asking of the question, is how I would put it. And to charge them for this is just ridiculous, in my opinion. It's ridiculous. And again, I'll come back to what I always talk about. And if you remember, when we discussed the actual incident, the Miles Lewis-Skelly red card, one of my big things was, okay, if you think that is serious foul play, And this is what the FA said, right? They said, or the independent commission said, that it was a foul. It was foul play, but they couldn't justify or categorize it as serious foul play. In that same game, the Wolves player who was sent off made a very similar challenge in terms of, I don't think he went in with the intention of doing the Arsenal player, but he obviously caught him in a bad way, and Michael Oliver felt that in itself was worth just a second yellow. And my point was, if that's a second yellow, Miles Lewis-Skelly's should have been a yellow. I'm not asking for anything other than consistency. If you send Miles Lewis-Skelly off, you should have shown him a red card as well. Now, it wouldn't have made any difference to us in terms of how that game panned out, because still, of course, Wolves would. Bear with me a second. I don't know what's gone on there. Is it my headphones? I think it might be my headphones playing up. Can you hear okay? Just let me know. I think it might have been my headphones that went crazy. Bloody hell, there was a loud beeping sound in my ears. Yep, it's still doing it. I think I'm going to leave the headphones off. Just let me know if you can hear me okay, or if the sound has been interrupted. I don't know what on earth happened there. This loud beep just started going off in my ears. Ouch. Anyway, my point is that I don't mind a referee sort of stamping down, and I don't mind referees taking a particular view on things as long as there's consistency applied. And I've always said this, and I stick by this: consistency should at least be applied within the realm of a 90-minute game. We didn't see that at the weekend, and unfortunately, we are now paying the price for having made our views very clear, despite it already being said and decided that actually we had a point, which is just mad to me. I thought Henry Winter summed this up really, really well. He said, the Arsenal players were wrong to surround the ref, but they were complaining about a wrong decision that then got overturned. And two, the FA has to be consistent and then charge every team whose players surround the ref. Refs deserve respect, which I agree with, but players deserve consistency and correct decisions. I think he summed that up brilliantly, right? That's the bottom line, guys. Like, as I said already, you want to send Miles Lewis-Skelly off? No problem. Send the Wolves player off. And then at least you're applying consistency within the same 90 minutes. Send him off directly, with a straight red card. He didn't do that. He showed a second yellow, which shows you that Michael Oliver can't even be consistent within the space of half an hour, let alone across the 90, let alone across different games. But look, I've said it many, many times before. I'm not naive enough to think that you're going to get complete consistency across the league every weekend when there's 10 different games going on with 10 different sets of officials, etc., etc. I'm not silly enough to think that. But I think Arsenal being charged the way they have when the decision has already been found to be incorrect, I think is just the FA trying to tick a box, if I'm being honest. It's just the FA, I think, trying to keep a little bit of peace. They've maybe undermined the PGMOL and Michael Oliver by coming out and saying what they've said about his decision and having that red card overturned. And so they want to put a little bit of a softener into the deal by saying, well, but the Arsenal conduct wasn't quite right as well. Let's make sure that Michael Oliver gets his little win as well, or the PGMOL. It's not even really about Michael Oliver. It's about the PGMOL as a whole, as an organization. But it's just laughable, isn't it? It's so petty. It's bordering on pathetic. But this is the world we live in right now. And again, final point I'll make on this is, you're going to charge us for it, no problem. But make sure that you charge everybody else who surrounds the referees. And I can think of countless occasions this season alone where I've seen players act far more aggressively, get right up close into a referee's face, and no action has been taken. So that's where the frustration comes from. And that's why Arsenal fans, I'm sure, will be frustrated by this over the course of the next week or so until it dies down. But is there even any point in responding to the charge or trying to appeal it? Well, you know that they're just going to do what they want to do anyway, so you might as well just pay the fine, swallow it, and move on. Okay, shall we move on? Shall we talk about the Ollie Watkins approach? I know we've talked about this a few times, but there's still a few bits that just don't make sense in my head, so I want to get into this. Okay, so how did it go down? On Wednesday evening, shortly before Arsenal took to the field to face Girona, we learned of Arsenal having made an approach for Aston Villa's Ollie Watkins. And I got to say, I got a little bit excited when I read that. I thought, wow, we are seriously trying. We are seriously trying to do a mega bit of business here. It was reported by Sammy Mockbell that Arsenal had made a £60 million offer, that had been rebuffed. Initial reports seemed to suggest that offer had gone in on Wednesday. David Ornstein then came out a little bit later on in the evening and clarified that actually that approach had been made on Monday, but that John Duran was closing in on a move to Saudi Arabia, making the likelihood of Villa selling Ollie Watkins quite low, right? So that, killed the mood a little bit. And I know David Ornstein joked on, I think it was Highbury Squad recently, that he always seems to feel like the bearer of bad news and all the rest of it. And look, he's just reporting what he knows. And we all, of course, appreciate that. But we've since heard a report today that said that actually Arsenal didn't offer £60 million and that they offered £45 million and then were told or had it indicated to them by Aston Villa that 60 million would do it. We've also heard from some people that Arsenal never actually made an official bid and that there was just an inquiry that went in. So it's like, I'm just so confused as to what's going on with this. I'm so confused as to where we're at on the Ollie Watkins thing. I don't know that he's going to leave Aston Villa. I think his chances of leaving Aston Villa have significantly reduced off the back of John Duran closing in on this move to Saudi Arabia. In truth, I'm a little bit confused because I refuse to believe that Arsenal would have made a move without believing there was a possibility that this deal gets done. Now, the only thing I can think of is that they've made that move before they were aware of John Duran moving to Saudi Arabia. It feels like that developed really quickly. It was yesterday morning when I was watching Sky Sports News that I learned of the interest from Saudi Arabia. And 24 hours later, there's a deal in place. He's getting ready to travel over there for his medical or for some contract signing, having already completed a medical in London, I think is what was reported. And it's all moved really, really fast. So either Arsenal did make the offer for Ollie Watkins at the beginning of the week, hoping that they could prize him away, not knowing that John Duran would be on his way to Saudi Arabia, or Arsenal still believe there's a chance that Ollie Watkins can come. And I've said this already today, and I'll say it again. Whether Arsenal go in and make a second bid or not is going to tell us so much about what they believe the situation to be. Would Aston Villa allow Ollie Watkins to go now under the current circumstances? You'd think no, but we also know that they're one of the clubs, from at least what I read and from what I understand, that could do with a financial boost. PSR is a bit of a problem for them, a bit like it is for Newcastle United, two relatively wealthy football clubs that are being hindered and held back by the current PSR rules. So would moving Ollie Watkins on for the right price at 29 years of age actually make good business sense and allow them to maybe deal with some of the issues that they have in that department? I don't know. The more I think about whether I'd like Ollie Watkins to come, the more I think I don't care about how much we pay for him, because I think he's a signing for the here and now. And that's what Arsenal right now desperately need. Forget about players for tomorrow. We can sign players for tomorrow, but do that another time, because we need someone now who's going to enhance us, who's going to improve us, and who, as Mikel Arteta has repeatedly said, is going to add something valuable to this team. It's not just about signing someone for the sake of it. So can we get Ollie Watkins in? I hope so. My gut feel is that this isn't over yet. Now, that might be completely wide of the mark, completely wrong, and there may never be a second bid. Arsenal might have been told categorically, no, it's not happening, back off. That could well be the case. But my gut tells me, I know it's hardly an exclusive, but my gut tells me that we haven't heard the last of this Ollie Watkins thing. So I'd be really, really interested to see how this is going to develop over the remaining days of the window. Now, we're recording this on Thursday the 30th in the evening. We've still got Friday the 31st, Saturday the 1st of February, Sunday the 2nd of February, and of course the deadline closes late on Monday the 3rd of February. So there's still a few days. There's still a possibility that Arsenal could potentially prize Ollie Watkins away, or that they could pivot and sign somebody else. Let me know your thoughts in the live chat. I'd love to hear from you guys. I really, really would. What I would also love is if you are with us currently right now, on YouTube, which I know a lot of you are. There's a few hundred of you with me live at this moment in time. Please do, guys, leave a like on the video. It really, really, really does help. Please subscribe to the channel as well as we continue to build towards our next milestone. That is very, very much appreciated. If you're watching us live on X right now, give it a like, give it a share. But if you'd like to make sure that you access all of our content, then please come over to either the Chronicles of Aguna YouTube channel or subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you so much for your continued support. Let's dive into the live chat box and let's discuss a couple more stories right after this really short pause. Okay. So let me know your thoughts on Ollie Watkins and the saga around him. Let's have a look then. Let's have a look at what you guys are saying. Charles says, even if the attempt is fine, the timing is off. They asked Aston Villa, and Aston Villa should have said yes. Aston Villa did not put all their cards on the table that Duran is leaving. Aston Villa could have tried to trick us. Maybe, I don't know. I think Aston Villa, as David Ornstein reported earlier in the week, were probably open to selling one of them in this window, as long as the money was right. As long as their valuation was met, they would have been happy, I think, to say goodbye to either one of them because, for Aston Villa, PSR, as I keep saying, is a problem. I think there would have probably been more openness, at least on Unai Emery's part, to move John Duran on than Ollie Watkins, because John Duran's been a problem for him at times. Ollie Watkins isn't that. He hasn't always started this season, Ollie Watkins, and that's been frustrating for him, I can imagine, when you think about his contribution over the last couple of seasons. But he's not a troublemaker. He's not the kind of player that's going to make a public show of those frustrations, whereas John Duran is. We've seen that time and time again. And I just sensed in the way that Unai Emery was talking about the Colombian at times that he was at the point where he was a little bit fed up of it. So I feel like Unai Emery's personal preference would have been to move John Duran on over Ollie Watkins. However, it all depends on the offers that come in. And obviously with Ollie Watkins being 29 years of age and John Duran looking as though the sky is the limit for him at just 21 years of age, you can understand why they thought, well, if the offer comes in for Duran, that's right, we've got to take that. And that's what Aston Villa have seemingly done. Leslie says it feels like Villa got the Watkins offer and then told the Saudis it's now or never for Duran, as they'd sell Watkins instead. And so maybe that pushed the Saudis into action. I don't know. Haylor says, what about the timing of this story? I'm not implying that David Ornstein doesn't speak the truth, but the timing either way is awful. Such big deals take time. Well, the thing is, we've talked about the window closing on Monday. And if David Ornstein's report is accurate, in which he says that the approach was made on Monday, Arsenal would have had a week to do the deal. Now, you could argue that maybe that's not long enough, but it's certainly a lot longer than it's being portrayed as. I often say this when we talk about reports and when we read things, we're often a little bit behind the curve. That's just how it works. Often things happen, things develop, and there will come a point where either somebody is happy to brief it because they're now confident that whatever it is they're talking about is progressing, is moving forward. Or sometimes journalists are a little bit later to the party, and that's understandable because you are only as good as your sources, right? So the timing isn't great in terms of if you wanted Ollie Watkins, you'd have thought that we'd have gone after him earlier in the window. But, maybe there was no indication earlier in the window that Villa would consider selling, and maybe there has been in the interim. I don't know. Paul James says this nonsense about being charged, talking about Arsenal, is both willfully vindictive and beyond petty. It's like the abuser's mate offering to abuse the ex because the abuser could no longer do it. The FA complete tosses. I've shared my thoughts on them. Just to be clear, those were Paul James's thoughts in the live chat. Just some confirmation from some of you in the chat about what Sky are reporting on the Duran thing. Leslie says, or Duran now gets wind of this and holds off with a move to Saudi to be Villa's main man. The kid's going to Saudi is awful. He's so much better than that. I agree with you. Abby Odin says, always said that Retegi is my wish, the Atalanta striker. He'll cost a pretty penny as well. Salahadin says, what about Mitoma? Because, of course, Mitoma is another one that is the subject of a big Saudi bid. Now, to be fair to the Saudis, they said that this was a long-term project and they were going to start investing. And I have to be honest with you, when it first all came about, I did wonder if this was going to be another China. Do you remember when China went through a period where they were signing loads of players, doing lots of deals, and then very quickly, I think something changed law-wise over there, and it was decided that actually they couldn't continue to do this, and foreign investment was not the right way to go, and that all collapsed. But the Saudi Pro League has set out a plan, a long-term plan, and it's another transfer window, and again, they're making big moves. They've managed to get John Duran, by the looks of it, a player who's on the way up. They're looking at Kaoru Mitoma. They've made a massive offer worth up to, in total, 90 million euros, I think is what I read earlier on today. For him, Brighton have rejected it. They're mad. Take the money and run. But yeah, it just goes to show that they are not messing around. Sammy Guna says, do you really think that Ollie Watkins would work well at Arsenal? He seems to be thriving under Emery, and we know his style doesn't really mesh with Arsenal. No, I disagree with that. I think he will work at Arsenal. I think he's got a lot of the qualities that Mikel Arteta would look for. He's very different to Kai Havertz, and I think in a way that's a good thing. I think if I think about what we need, right, this month, if I think about what we need in that centre forward position, this is how I view it, right? So first and foremost, we need another body at centre forward, right? We need someone else who can come in and play that position and share the burden and take some of the burden away from Kai Havertz. We need that player to be just as competent. We need that player to be just as much of a threat, even if that threat comes in a slightly different way. People laughed at me. I said this on TalkSport like 2 weeks ago, and people laughed at me. I said if I was Arsenal, I'd look at someone like Alvaro Morata. And people laughed at me. They laughed me out of the room. They couldn't believe that such things were coming out of my mouth. But the reason I said that was because, for me, Alvaro Morata is a very similar type of profile player to Kai Havertz. Big stature, physical presence, great experience, can score goals. We've seen that pretty much everywhere he's been. Didn't have a great time in the Premier League with Chelsea, but generally his career has been a very fruitful one. And I was very, very impressed with what I saw of him at the European Championships, leading the line and captain in Spain. So that was a player that I was talking about. And I understand tonight, just reading through social media, that he's potentially on his way to Turkey, which is interesting. So it feels like we've maybe missed the boat there. But anyway, not everybody will agree with me on that one, so we'll leave that there. Clark says, why do we embarrass ourselves every window? And I'm assuming what you mean by that is, why do we leave it late? Why do we put ourselves in a situation where we're probably not going to get the player that we want and end up left with egg on our faces? What I would say, and listen, I don't know where this report has come from. I don't understand the intricacies of how some of our top journalists source these things. But what I will say is, I'd be very surprised if it was Arsenal that leaked this. I'd be very surprised if this briefing came from Arsenal. I think, and I can't remember who said it, so apologies, but someone in the chat mentioned that, maybe our offer that came in for Ollie Watkins was spun around and used by Aston Villa to convince the Saudis that they needed to meet the valuation for John Duran in order to get that deal done, because they probably made the point, as you rightly said, that if we let Ollie Watkins go, we're not letting John Duran go. So that could be the case. That could be the case, that we've been used a little bit. If we've been used a little bit, and if Aston Villa have sort of played us a little bit here, which they're well within their rights to do, that's what happens at top level football. If that's happened, then we have been left with a little bit of egg on our faces. And so therefore, it's unlikely that this word of the Ollie Watkins approach has come from anybody connected to Arsenal, or at least within the sort of inner circles, right? Surely they wouldn't want that to get out if we have no chance of landing the player. Surely they wouldn't. Surely they'd have preferred that it went completely under the radar, that we'd even approached over Ollie Watkins, because if we don't get him, it could end up being quite embarrassing. Some would argue, and we discussed this on the last episode with Mike a little bit, that maybe it's Arsenal playing a little bit of a game, and maybe Arsenal have made that approach knowing that their chances of getting it over the line are slim, and so they want the fans to know that they're at the very least trying. I don't necessarily subscribe to that point of view, because I think, knowing what I know about Arsenal, knowing some of the people in that PR team and that work with the players, etc., not amazingly well, but relatively well, knowing the way they operate, I'd be shocked if they wanted this to get out. I think it's the other way around. I don't think it's Arsenal playing a game and trying to, convince people that they're trying, only to then hide behind the cloak of failure, etc. I don't think it's that. I think it's the other way around. I think Aston Villa have probably played us a little bit here. Granddaddy Guna says, I'd take him. He's an Arsenal fan and he would crawl over hot coals to play for the Arsenal. He is an Arsenal fan, Ollie Watkins, and that would play a part. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we're discussing all of. We've spent a lot of time talking about the club to club stuff, right? And fine, it's a valid conversation to have. But just imagine how Ollie Watkins is feeling. Like, he probably really wants this move, given what we know of him, his history. Apologies there for the cutout in sound. Not sure exactly what happened. But yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that Ollie Watkins would be probably quite up for this move. And he must be sitting there thinking, you've let John Duran go, and now I'm not going to be able to make the move of my dreams that might not actually be available to me come the summer if Arsenal pivot in another direction. So, yeah, we'll see. Clark with a super chat. Thank you so much for your very, very kind donation to the channel. He says we managed to embarrass ourselves every window. I will reserve judgment on that. I'm not saying anything until the end of the window on that. What is this? Super chat. I'm Donna. Do you? I've got a super chat for those of you listening from I'm Donna, who says, Wagwan, Mr. Symeou, are you single and available? I can confirm that I am not. Conrad says, why do so many Arsenal players leave for free? The self-sustaining model doesn't work well when management can't get fees for players who are leaving. I think in the past that was fair to say. I think in the past it was fair to say that Arsenal were terrible sellers, and as a result, that self-sustaining thing was nothing more than a pipe dream. And we saw over the last few years Arsenal's ownership invest quite heavily, or at least the club. I don't know where it came from exactly, but from the club's point of view, they put a lot of money in to get the team to the point where they could be competitive again, swallowing a lot of losses along the way, the termination of contracts, having to fork out for players without bringing a great deal in the other way. But I would argue last summer was the first summer where we clearly looked much more competent in the sales department. And so I think it's a little bit unfair to sort of bring up this now. I think moving forward, we should be better because the club is being run better. And this should be less of an issue going forward. But I can understand why it's a criticism of the past. Nunandinho says, what is your view on recent reports linking Martinelli with a move to Saudi Arabia in January? If you want him, cough up 100 million quid, is what I would say to those people. Look, I don't envisage Gabriel Martinelli leaving anytime soon. I think he's very much bought in on the Arsenal project. I think the club really appreciate him, and I think he's staying put. But everybody has their price, and if Saudi Arabia come in and offer something ridiculous, then maybe Arsenal would consider it. It's interesting because Leandro Trossard is said to be or have been in the past the subject of Saudi interest as well. This takes me on nicely to what was my last story. I beg your pardon, I've clicked on the wrong post there. It is about Kieran Tierney. It's understood that Kieran Tierney will stay at Arsenal for the final 6 months of his contract before returning to Celtic in the summer. We did say that we thought that was going to be the case. Brendan Rodgers confirmed that there was an agreement in place for the summer, but there was some question marks as to whether or not Arsenal would allow him to leave a little bit earlier on loan or something like that. And And that's obviously not materialized. Mikel Arteta probably doesn't want to take the risk, doesn't want to take the gamble. And so Kieran Tierney will stay on at Arsenal for the remainder of the season, which I think is good news because I still think he could be of use to us as long as he's fit. Okay, one more player that I wanted to talk about is Mathys Tel. We've been talking about him quite a bit over the last few days. That's another name that's been linked with Arsenal. Reports claim that not only Arsenal, but Manchester United and Tottenham and Chelsea are all having a look at this lad. French player, winger by trade, but can play through the middle, I'm told, and is a player that has proven himself to be very, very useful in the final third and competent in front of goal when given the opportunity to be exactly that. What we're reading sort of at the time of recording is that Tottenham have found a verbal agreement with Bayern Munich over the permanent signing of Mathys Tel for around about 60 million euros, which equates to around about 50 million pounds. That's not very Daniel Levy-like, but it sounds like Tottenham are dead serious about this. However, Mathys Tel at the time of recording is said to be undecided on his future, which suggests to me that he's not totally convinced by the Tottenham Hotspur project. I think he'd rather join Arsenal. I think he'd rather join Manchester United as well. And so Tottenham have to sit there and wait. And we're talking about being embarrassed in the window. It would be quite embarrassing for Tottenham if, having stepped forward and made this offer, even just verbally to Bayern Munich for a real significant amount of money for a player, only for him to turn his nose up at you and go elsewhere. That is the definition of being embarrassed in the transfer window. So if we're in the mud, if we're struggling, if things are looking bad for us, you can always look at Tottenham, knowing that it's probably going to be a little bit more embarrassing. But anyway, Mathys Tel, we haven't really heard anything from an Arsenal point of view. You know, we've heard loosely that the club are interested in him, that the club are looking at him, that they see him as a potential option. But we've not actually heard anything concrete to suggest that Arsenal have progressed that interest or admiration into anything more. So, it doesn't look like that's necessarily on the horizon either for Arsenal. And that's where I think people are struggling now. Like, we heard nothing for weeks, and then the Watkins stuff comes out, and very quickly that's shut down. And then you hear about Mathys Tel, and you're hoping for a bit of progress because the window is almost shut, and you don't get that either. So you can understand why there's a little bit of frustration within the ranks at the moment. But as far as I understand it, there isn't anything to suggest that we're leading the race or indeed serious runners in the Mathys Tel race. So yeah, we'll see what happens with all of that. I'll take a couple of your questions before I sign off. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, guys, please leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel if you're new as well. That really, really does help too. Thank you for your support, because your support is allowing me to make more episodes, to create more content. And if you want to support us by going one further, you can find us over on patreon.com. Just before I take a couple of your questions, I do want to remind you guys that this podcast is brought to you by Stocks FC. You can buy and you can trade stocks in your favorite players with the potential of earning money as their stocks rise. Of course, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme, so I would only say play it if you can afford it. I'm having a lot of fun with it. And as I said, I'll be keeping you across my journey on Stocks FC over the course of our upcoming videos. Stocks FC, check them out. Link is in the description below. Right, let's get back to the chat box then. Let's take a few of your questions before we sign out. Paul says, last season, some of the German newspapers reported that Arsenal had made an inquiry about Tel, but he wanted guarantees he'd play, which he didn't get. He might be interested now. He's a bloody good finisher. That's what stands out to me when I watch clips of Mathys Tel. Do I watch Bayern Munich every week? No, I don't. I'd be lying if I said I do. But when I have seen him and what I have seen of him, having done a little bit of research over the last few days, I see a player who is a really competent finisher. And he scored a lot of goals last season. And I know it doesn't look like an amazing amount because you look at the number of appearances, but I think there were only 6 starts in there. So when you factor that in, he's obviously someone that can impact in the final third and someone who I think could be a real threat. I don't know that I'm so convinced that I would pay 50, 60 million euros for him right now. which is seemingly what Tottenham are willing to do. But if a deal can be done that sees him come to Arsenal with maybe an option to buy come the summer, then I'd be open to that as well, for sure. Lots of you talking at Raheem Sterling after his penalty miss against Girona. That was obviously very, very disappointing. Sally says Sterling wasn't planned. This Watkins bid wasn't planned. Why are we becoming a bit disorganized and desperate? I think it's fair to say that Sterling wasn't planned because that just came out of nowhere on deadline day. I think I said the night before deadline day when we did a live stream that I wouldn't be surprised if Arsenal went in the next day and tried to get Raheem Sterling on one of those lastminute.com deals. So I think it's fair to say that wasn't planned. As I said, if we made an approach for Ollie Watkins on Monday, then we're a week out from the end of the window when that approach was made. So that, coupled with the fact that we know Mikel Arteta has been an admirer of Ollie Watkins for a while, I feel like he might not have been the priority necessarily going into the window, but he would have been someone that's been on Arsenal's radar and on Arsenal's list, if you like, for quite a while. But I agree with you about being organised. And it's interesting to me because, you know, a lot of the time we sort of criticize the club for not being willing to just go and throw money at actually the sort of irony of it all is that Arsenal have got to this position where they're competing again because they've adapted the opposite approach, which is by being meticulous in their planning, going out and getting the players that they want. If they've got to spend big to get them, but they're convinced they're the right guy, they don't seem to mind. They seem to be willing to push the boat out that little bit further when required. And that organization is why we are where we are. But people want to go to that next step. And in their desperation to see us go to that next step, I think all of that calmness and strategical planning is maybe, at least in the eyes of a lot of fans, is maybe ready to be thrown out the window. Curtis says, glad to finally catch you live from New Zealand. Been following you for years, mate. Thank you so much, mate. Really, really do appreciate that. Thank you, and all the best to you and everybody else over on the other side of the globe. Ian Wallace says, I agree with Watkins for the now, but this is us we're talking about. I can't see us spending 60 million on him and then buying a striker in the near future. Yeah, but this is the thing, Ian, right? Like, so if you got Ollie Watkins in the door, because of how good he is, I know he's 29, which isn't ideal, but it's 29. It's not 47. Because he's 29, I think you'd be buying him for like 2, maximum 3 seasons. And so what you'd be doing is saying, right, I'm going to get Ollie Watkins for the here and now. He's got 2-3 good seasons in him. And then we'll reassess the striker market in 2 or 3 seasons' time. I think that's how Arsenal would look at it. Like, I don't think we live in a world where they would go 60 million on Watkins and then 60 million on Sesko in the summer. Like, I don't see that happening at all. I think Ollie Watkins would be them just shifting the plans around a little bit to help them currently. So, yeah, that's where I'm at. On that. Right, I think I am going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me. We've got hundreds of you with us on YouTube. We've got over 1,000, over 1,100 of you with us on X right now. Come over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, give it a like, all the rest of it. It's very, very much appreciated. And if you're watching us on X, come over and subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed. I'd really, really appreciate that. Right. I'm going to love you all and leave you all. As I say, it's my gut feeling, nothing more. But I don't think this Ollie Watkins thing is over. We'll all be keeping a close eye on our X feeds, I'd imagine, over the next few days. And fingers crossed we end up with what we need. Because one thing we can all agree on, even if we disagree about targets and the way that the club operates and all of the rest of it, the one thing we can agree on is that we really do need someone in attack. Until the next one, take care of yourselves. Have a great day. Goodbye.